So we're back. We're still on day, I think, is it day 6 of the Ellii programme, and we spent the morning talking about theory of change and also looking at the building blocks of what is social value and how do you measure this stuff. What I was going to just spend half an hour, 40 minutes or so now on, before we get into our afternoon panel, is talking about how to use this information. We started talking and we heard for a couple of examples in the last session how people were starting to use this information to perhaps use the content in funding bids, or to I gave some examples of people that actually applied for awards and won awards, and they'd use the social value measurement data and impact data to strengthen the case for that. And people also use this information on their websites for, for information, for call outs to describe what they're doing better because they've got more data. They also might create infographics. We talked briefly about that. So hopefully this next bit, although there's a lot more to think about, we've had an action-packed day where we're thinking about a lot. This is like the homeward stretch, and Rome wasn't built in a day. You have to kind of digest this stuff over time, and the more you get using some of these tools that we've shared today, and the more that you practice this stuff and actually start asking questions of your stakeholders, your immediate direct stakeholders and wider ones, the sooner you'll get all sorts of information back. And there was a lady in the chat, Jean, had mentioned, even though she's not gone for funding yet, she did do interviews and she did seek information through surveys at the start of designing what she was doing, and that's absolutely the right thing to do. Don't wait till you're going for funding to do this. At the point of the idea and piloting it, the sooner you get your idea out of your head and share it with other people, whether you're designing a new service within an existing organisation or whether you're doing something from a standing start, the better. And you raise awareness of what you're doing, you strengthen and shape what you're doing, and bring it to life quicker. So let's move along. So where we got to before was we were looking at social value, and we'd given people an example of how to put together perhaps a plan to try and measure their social value. And we talked about, I'm just going to take a step back actually. We talked about how you might go to do this, and we talked about the different ways you would do it, the questions that you would ask, who you would evaluate this with. We gave an example of an organisation of who they might be seeking to engage in some different types of questioning and gathering feedback and testimonials and examples and data that can then be analysed into different things. And what that then turns into is lots of things. So I'm just giving you 3 examples of what doing that kind of exercise, depending on how you go about it, can lead to. So in the most basic sense, by talking, I'm looking at that orange text at the top here. This is horse herds, something in what horse herd, but by talking to people and getting their testimonials and analysing what was said, you can start to communicate what you're doing better. She might just have said, well, we run sessions in our stables to help people improve their mental health. They come in and they meet the horses, and we do kind of equine-centered learning, but it's like, equine facilitated learning. It's like, what on earth does that mean? So what we've identified was, by unlocking the potential of people who have experienced trauma and personal difficulties, or who struggle to manage their emotions and behaviour, Horsehood has a unique and effective methods to enable people who were previously writing themselves off or who have been underestimated by others to fulfil meaningful lives. So it's a bit of a long-winded sentence, but once you start, rather than people can bombard you with, who they're working with, or what their activities are, but a funder or a commissioner wants to know what's going on, and what's the benefit, what's the value here. And there's a lot of value in that paragraph, unlocking potential, working with people with complex needs, explaining that they've got unique methods to help people who would, were not accessing support or who were underestimating themselves and now able to live meaningful lives. And you can give them lots of examples of that later on, but by doing this exercise, it helped pull out some useful paragraphs to be able to use for different audiences. And then another example, an easy way, you know, when you start doing this work, you'll have all sorts of case studies that you put together or that you write. And, you know, this was an example from one of the horse herd veterans. You know, there was this, you know, Jamie, it's explaining what, you know, he came across horse herd through a local veteran support group, been out of the armed forces for over 40 years, still suffers from trauma and mental health. This has resulted in multiple suicide attempts, and, you know, it's affected his relationships. So it's, what's the ripple effect? You know, it's affected his relationships, his quality of life, his sense of identity and belonging, you know, and so quite a complex character coming in to access support. And so what he said was, you know, the program blew him away. He didn't realize horses. So this was, I found it really hard to explain or to understand what is equine facilitated learning. It's really hard to get people to get their heads around it. And what he said made it so much easier than what the company was trying to describe. So he said, the program blew me away. I didn't realize horses were that intuitive and able to read and respond to human behavior. That's basically what happens. You can see, they can tell your feelings, your emotions and your energy and anger levels. You know, I can't tell you the science, but it works. And then, you know, it's trying to explain how, you know, in his case study, there was a whole set of stuff that talked about how, you know, he'd now been able to access improved housing situations as a result of his confidence. And he was able to, you know, make contact with his family for the first time in 20 years after not, you know, being in contact. So showing the ripple effects of what's happening through bringing stories to life is really key. And once you've got 30 case studies, you can then analyze those to say, you know, 20% of, you know, 30 people that we've spoken to said this, you know, and that is how it builds as a kind of library of information over time that you can then create data from. The only other 2 points I was going to say about this, or to building on how you measure your social value, is talking about statements and commitments and key value indicators. And I work with people on a one-to-one with this, where they need that, where they're ready for it, but it's worth being aware of. I alluded earlier to the fact that what can happen, people can just measure things for the sake of it. You know, they leap and lurch around measuring things that they think might be important, or measuring things that somebody's told them, or measuring what the funder wants to know. But year on year, consistently as an organisation, that's not helpful for you. You need to set out your own stall. And so with horse herd, when we, you know, did a huge amount of work looking at, you know, over 130 people, 130 children that had engaged with their horse herd services, and about 30 veterans. And we did a whole series of stakeholder interviews with children, families, teachers, people that had funded the work, and found out, you know, we asked those questions. All we did was we asked these questions. You know, how did you first come across horse herd? What have you got involved with? You know, describe what has been of most value. You know, what have you enjoyed most about being connected to this organisation? You know, how's life for you now? You know, are you doing anything differently as a result? You know, has anything changed or improved, you know, since being in contact with this organisation? And what you get from that is immense. And then when you look at what people say, you start to map what's been said, and you pull out the key themes, basically. And where there's repetition, or where people are saying things over and over again, that's clearly an area where you're having value. And so what happens is you can get to a point where you can see quite clearly what the value of your organisation is. And sometimes it's what you expected, and sometimes there's additional stuff. And I'd say almost always there's additional stuff. And that then helps you develop your key value indicators, the key things that you're going to measure impact on. You can't measure everything, and you can't be all things to all people. And what I would say is, what we've learned is that by measuring what's important to your stakeholders and learning what's, you know, of value to them, you can measure your you focus in on what's valued by your stakeholders, simply what your immediate and direct beneficiaries value, what your indirect beneficiaries value, and what your wider stakeholders value. There'll be threads that marry up across the lot, and there'll be some that are more relevant to your wider stakeholders than others. But rather than track everything, you know, and things that don't really make sense, or are more tangible, really, less tangible for your organization. Measure what's important, and you'll only learn that by asking people. So through the horse herd lot, we worked out, after going through all sorts of evidence and information, the key value indicator one was, you know, that they're building healthier and emotionally resilient communities. That's one area of value, and that's something to keep tracking and asking quality questions about. The other area was, you know, creating and developing independent and active citizens with increased capability and an increased sense of personal responsibility. So asking further questions on, you know, how people are actively involved in their communities, what they're now, you know, what they're doing, rather than being isolated, they're being active. So what are they doing, and how is their life changing as a result? And how is an increased sense of personal responsibility helping them in helping their families and making a difference? So that was another area. The third impact indicator with them was around, you know, increased, you know, and improving skills, aspirations, and ability to transition towards positive futures was what that, you know, was another area that they were then able to start tracking and identifying as a key area of value and impact that they wanted to keep looking at. And the fourth one for them was, you know, improved lifestyle chances and opportunities. So everybody, and many people that they talked to, had all sorts of improved life chances and improved access to opportunities as a result of their experience with horse herd and what they were now doing. And so they were able to talk to people in more detail around, you know, where their lifestyles were at and what kinds of access to opportunities they had at the start. And then, you know, what was then happening after the program, and then a year down the line, then what, you know, and how has it evolved? So I just share that with you to start to show how, by asking these questions up front, it can then trickle into making your life easier in terms of the questions that you're kind of focusing on, and the value that you're reporting on becomes more simple because you focus it down as to kind of what's most specific and relevant for what it is you're doing, rather than talking about, you know, I don't know, there could be all sorts of other things, trying to think, but, you know, not going left field really with all your questions and focusing them in on what's going to strengthen the social value case for what you're doing. Another day, or in the chat, or ask me again if you're interested, but I also did the social value report for Lebanese market after it had been running 5 years. I helped the woman who set that up when she first got started, and then I helped her again to find some money to scale it. 5 years down the line, it was quite cathartic to go back and do a whole raft of consultation work, interviews, analysing what the traders said, what the community said, you know, what the customers of that market said, local residents, local businesses. We did a really good 360 review of what people value about that market. And after we'd sifted it through and we'd listened, you know, to what was of value to people, we were able to come up with a series of commitments or statements that Lebanese market was going to continue delivering and reporting against. And so I won't read all these, but to give you a flavour, you know, Lebanese market is a commitment and intention to offer jobs to local people wherever possible. It was quite clear that they were offering, there was a key financial and economic value and a local value from the amount of job creation and income that people were earning from working at the market. So that was something they were going to be committed to keeping doing. Lebanese market commits to support and provide opportunities to improve the economic outlook for local people. We were able to show the financial benefit of the market over 5 years and what it brought, you know, what the market traders collectively earned was, you know, £178,000 over the period. You know, there were other financial benefits, and there was, you know, the people at staff at the market, the traders at the market, and other economic benefits. Yeah, there were a whole list there, but it's just showing you that in addition to the usual stuff that you might anticipate an impact report can create, it can help you set your strategy and set your direction and evolve your theory of change. You know, once you've talked to people and you've heard what they what they value about what you do, and seeing all the impact that's happening, you evolve as an organization, and strengthen what you do in that way. So I was just going to come back. We did hear before lunch from a couple of people where they use research and impact to strengthen their bid cases and things like that. I was going to perhaps just see who we've got after lunch, and if anybody else wanted to share an example of anything that they've gone and done some engagement work, and it's then led to preparing funding bids or putting content together for something specific. I know we've got a mixed group here today, but anybody got an example of something, or something they might be planning or preparing to do? Just going to stop sharing so I can see people. Ooh.
I might be speaking out of turn here because I haven't consulted anybody else, but during the course of today I've been thinking that we've got a development ward that was standing in the May local election. I've been thinking, we could use that as a case study where we, try and get together a group of, I'd like to look at women voters, because we want to get a local woman to stand as a candidate. And that's part of our objectives. And I think we could use the My Voting app as a way into getting a group of women together to use as a focus group, and hopefully for one of them to emerge as our next candidate in the ward.
Yeah, then that's a different kind of success of finding the right person to then progress with your campaigning and your goals and create social change in different ways.
Yeah,
absolutely. These methods can be used for various different reasons and different ways.
But I think that would give us evidence, to evaluate the impact as well, not just on anyone who became a candidate, but other women, and how it might have made them more confident and so on.
Yeah, testimonials and feedback, and absolutely. And 50% of women that use the app now do this, or 70% of women that got involved said this. It's all good data to help strengthen a momentum for something. I don't know if Mary's there, but I'm conscious that Mary may have been applying for funding of late, because I've seen her telling us that she's secured it on Twitter. She might still be away on lunch, but I'm not sure if you're there, Mary, and able to come and talk to us. No, we heard from Asma earlier, and Jean, just going to come to you, Jean. I know it's different, it's not talking about bids, but in the chat you'd mentioned about how you've done some research with some groups, and that's been helping shape your ideas. Is that?
Yeah, pretty much so. After every session that I run, I give them a feedback form, and just general questions. How did you feel? What did you know anything about this work that I was doing beforehand? What do you feel afterwards? Would you come again? That kind of thing. So that's how I found.
And once you've got those, let's say you've got 20 people or 30 people that have filled in a form like that now, or you will have over time. What do you then do with that data?
Well, I just file it, and I think, I'm on the right track. That's what
shaking my head there, and that's what most people do. And I'm not shaking my head at you. It's that's what people do. And what we need to do, Jean, is sit down with you and dig out all those lovely bits of paper. You want to see my lounge at the minute is post-it note heaven with this research that we're doing at the moment. But basically, all you do is we look at those forms and we pull out some statistics. If you've got 20 forms, or ideally 30 forms plus, you can create some, reasonable statistics that can tell you things that you can use in a funding bid.
Right, okay.
And that's where these things start. So you're on the right track in starting that, but you've got short of then turning that data into useful evidence to convince somebody to back what you're doing. It's nice for you, as I said earlier.
Yeah.
We do this in order to sleep at night and know we're doing a good job. And so you've got as far as that, but what you then need to do is make sure that you can then use this data to turn what you're doing into a sustainable initiative, and turn that data into opportunities. Refining the services, you can refine your services, but if you can help you turn that into cash and resources, and communicate your track record in different ways, it will turn it into money for you to
Yeah, well, I've still got them there. I've got all of them there, so you can help me with that, or someone can.
Yeah, we can have a look and show you how it's done. Perhaps we'll do it on Zoom and we'll show people how it's done.
Oh, thank you.
But well, I'm gonna, just for the purposes of time, because we've got our panel starting shortly. I just was going to come back to highlight there's a couple more bits that we're going to cover in a second, just before the panel starts. And I want to get onto the point Tina was making in the chat around national data. I'm going to come on to that in just a second. So it's a really good point, and it's part of the equation. When you're seeking to apply for funding and strengthen your bids, there's two things that people fall short on. One is having accurate data that relates to their organisation and what they're doing, and the other is having good policy data, and the two together give you a really strong case. So areas that people often need strengthening is around who their beneficiaries are. So I wonder, Jean, you don't have to answer me here, but when I look at your evaluation forms, will they really tell me much? Are you asking enough to find out, or to be able to analyse who you're working with? So if somebody's working with particular communities, somebody's working with women, somebody's working with people with specific needs, somebody's, there's ways of asking questions in a light touch way that doesn't feel like you're being questioned to death, that will then help you angle your request to different funders or council areas or sectors to be able to get the right support funneling to what you're doing. So that's one area. And looking at a percentage breakdown of your beneficiaries that do this and that. I've got an example in a sec. There's being more specific around your activities. What we talked about this morning about the theory of change. People are often, because they're not really number crunched or worked through what exactly their activities are, and being really specific around their activities, outputs and outcomes, it can fall short in an application, and a funder will think, well, this person doesn't know what they're doing, or they can't clearly tell me what they're doing in terms of activities, outputs and outcomes. And if you haven't written this down, or if you haven't done it really thoroughly, you can't put, like Chinna was saying this morning, you can't put a fully costed budget around this, or you don't know where to start in how much money you're asking for, because you've not just got it down. So that's something that people fall down on. Being more specific around how direct, like we said, these different kinds of beneficiaries, direct beneficiaries and the wider economy benefit. So you might talk about the people that come to your sessions, or the people that get involved in your group or network or whatever, but often funders want to, sometimes it can look like you're only benefiting, 10 people or 15 people, but in reality, you're probably benefiting triple that, because the ripple effect of what you're doing is impacting their families, their employers, their children, the wider local businesses, all of these people that we talked about earlier in sessions. And even if you're not doing a full evaluation into how these people are benefiting, you can at least start to talk about your awareness that whilst we benefit 15 women through our weekly group of such and such, that the indirect benefit of that is X, Y, and Z. And, as a result, over 90 people are benefiting from what we're doing. So it's just being clever about things like that. And last but not least, the bit that Tina mentioned in the chat around policy links, and something I'm going to give you a quick overview of in a moment, so that you can go away and look at sources of data, and we might talk about that and see what you're using currently. So I think the best thing to do is just show you a couple of quick examples, and then have a look at this data. So I'm only going to glance at these, the big slides. We've put these case studies or examples in for you to look at afterwards. They're there in the slide deck, so that when you think, what did she mean by that? This gives you a feel for it. So when we've said, people often let themselves down because they've not explained properly who their beneficiaries are. In this case, this was a bid that, I've supported somebody with just recently, and done a reasonable job of working out who their beneficiaries are. But what would have strengthened this is if she could have said, 30% of our group are at risk of becoming homeless. 70% have low or no qualifications. 25% are lone parents. I don't know, 40% are aged over 50. Doesn't tell me there. And it's not the end of the world, but it would show that they've got more knowledge about who they're working with if it does. And granted, this is often all word count specific when you're putting bids together, but being a bit more specific around that could be really helpful, along with other sort of local intelligence around who it is that you're supporting. What's the context of women in sale that have these needs? There's not much about that in here. There's a bit here that relates to somebody who put in a bid recently, and the only bit that they wrote was the bit in black. So they wrote a little bit, what are the main activities of your organisation? And when I read it, they totally missed out a whole chunk of what they do. Sometimes people have a brain fog, and they've totally forgotten, that they, additionally they promote music, creativity and the arts through services, activities and events. And that was really critical to their bid. If they'd have just said, we do this bit, they're missing out 50% of what the bid was all about. And also, again, they had got no stats and they hadn't got the language to describe who it was they worked with. And so knowing, Shelley, I'm just asking a favour. Kat at GMCBO doesn't seem to have the Zoom link. They were all sent it, but would you mind resending it?
Yeah, that's no problem.
Thank you. So I just started them off thinking, this is who the beneficiaries are. So the beneficiaries are people facing mild to moderate and complex mental health needs as a result of trauma, addiction, and cycles of poverty and hardship. Alongside, so in addition to the people they're working with, the wider beneficiaries are creative and digital multimedia artists, musicians. They're benefiting because they're getting work, delivering sessions to support people and build their skills. And again, needed some stats there on 40% of our client group are this, everything that should have been in this list was lacking from here. So some work was needed to help strengthen all of that. Another one, people get confused in the questions sometimes that go in these forms. So in the form, it was asking, what's the benefit and how will this be achieved? And what they put the benefit is increased confidence and self-esteem. So what does that mean? Anybody can say that. And so what I suggested to them is that these black bullet points here, they'd actually put as proposed activities. And when I read that, to me, they're still benefits. People accessing our project will report that they have this, that, and the other. People accessing the programme will report they've discovered, online forums and additional, get support with job skills. Those are benefits. So I moved them back into the benefits box and I physically wrote how these are going to be achieved. You have to be it's about being specific and clear. Hopefully you can see the comparison there and that makes sense. We're physically describing how that benefit's going to take place. And what it comes down to is it's all language and it's all just taking something perhaps that one stage further. People don't realize there's the aims. So the aims are the aim is that people will increase, have increased access to this, that, and the other. And the aim is that, they'll have increased confidence, but the objective is how you're going to physically do it. Yeah. So it's no good to just put your aim in. Most funding bids want to know specifically how you're going to do it. And that's why I've mentioned those SMART objectives there, because they do relate to funding bids as well as business planning. I don't want to bore you here because I want to get on to something else, but I've just got 2 slides here. I'm going to flash up a big one that's like, and a little one. These 2 slides, when you get chance, or if you get a chance to read these again, they relate to the problem that a lot of people have weak bids because they don't link what they're doing to specific policy, industry, local or national strategic research, data or objectives. And this here is a paragraph out of our recent Awards for All bid where we were successful and we we didn't just say, you know, we want to set, we're going to take over the station in Heaton Chapel. It's got a derelict first floor, and you know, we want you to give us some money to help us refurbish it. You know, because they want to know why is there a need? How do they know it's worthwhile doing this? How do we know local people are even going to want this? Why is this the best solution to the challenge? So we were able to let them know that from, you know, surveys and research through our strategic networks, we know that there are 200 social enterprises locally, you know, and all these data here. So we gave them good reasons and solid stats to show we've done our stuff, we've researched the need, and you know, we're explaining, you know, there's a lot of smaller micro enterprises, and that by setting up a little office space for smaller, targeting smaller social enterprises, that this will address a need, not just because there's a lot of them there, but also because the pandemic's affected the situation. There's a lack of affordable office space. So it's just giving you some examples of how funding bids, you know, to be strengthened, perhaps sometimes need to be worded, and the kinds of informational stats that you need to have at your disposal to strengthen your case. And similarly goes for this. So this was like a short, there was no reference here to this research, but they still gave us the money. Whereas in this case, we were applying for some funding to work with men who, you know, needed access to health and wellbeing and therapeutic services. And we were demonstrating that after going and looking at various reports, and some of which are kind of highlighted here, we were able to clearly say, you know, evidence, you know, men are 4 times less likely to go and see their GP. And according to census data, there are this many men living here, you know, and we want to, you know, use some support and some funding from this, or, you know, from equity housing to do X, Y, and Z. And we're explaining exactly where we're going to do this stuff, and, you know, so on and so forth. But we're also giving them some links as well to the growing medical evidence for the benefit of complementary and holistic therapies. This related to other elements in the funding bid, but just showing you that, you know, not every word count can fit all of this stuff in, but where you can show your sources, where you can use, you know, punchy short data that somebody else has gathered. That's the other beauty of what we're talking about here, is even if you've not got the hours in the day to do the research, and even if it's not something that you feel comfortable you want to do, you don't know how to do it just yet, there's oodles of data out there that you can just lift from other people's reports. Okay, and with that in mind, I'm going to come I don't know if we can come, perhaps I'll take a couple and then I'll just whiz up this slide. So yeah, if we're nearly at time to do our panel session, but I just wonder, hearing from people in the group here, are there anybody here that this is resonating with, and you can think, oh yes, I looked at what the council said about this, or I've used the Office of National Statistics to get this, or maybe there's some university report that you spotted that was helpful, or a national report to do with mental health. Who knows? Has anybody accessed any reports that they've used to build a case for what they're doing? All the slides will be available after the session, by the way. I think Tina might have mentioned that she's gone for used a national report.
Yeah, sorry, I used the LGBT Foundation's Hidden Figures report.
Good example.
I think I was doing the last funding bid, and you know, the biggest things were about sort of over COVID, increasing substance abuse, you know, calls to their helplines, and one of the biggest ones was 63% of the respondents, and they had something like 550, said that they would rather go for support from an organisation run by people who represent them. And I think that's quite a sort of important thing, but across the board, you know, people want help from people like them, which I think was quite a sort of strong point to add to my case, because there's NAFL locally for our community. So
yeah. Good example. And yeah, sometimes it's council related reports, sometimes it's like health and wellbeing or public sector, you know, criminal justice reports, and sometimes it's what's the word? Sometimes it's reports like you just described, where national agencies have already done the legwork to find this stuff out for you. And unless you know this stuff exists, it never crosses your mind, perhaps, to look for it. But I'm going to blow your minds here with another busy slide where we'll come back to that. I'm not expecting you to know what all of this means, and we can describe it today and we can keep talking about it. But there's oodles and oodles of policy reports out there to evidence need. There's things related to the government, so the NHS, the Department for Education, DBIS, I think it's now called, but Business, Enterprise, Innovation Department, and the DWP. There's another government department that's producing reports upon reports, really. More money gets put in reports than really should, and are people using this data well to make things work? So there's a few examples there. The future in mind, 5-year forward review. Often these reports, even if they're a few years out of date, might have been the most recent report that's been done. So you can still use these. So I'm looking around because all our speakers are saying, where's the Zoom link? My email's going to people's junk mail. I think that's what happens, and they're all now saying, where are you?
I think they've all got them now.
Have they? I know Jess is still texting me to say she's not, but anyway, I'm sure they'll get there.
She's just replied to say she's got it.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, no,
so there's government department versions, and then there's also, perhaps let them in when I've done this session, if that's all right, Shelley, I'm nearly there. The whole range of things. There's a joint strategic needs assessment. There's one in every area. Mintel reports relate to research around retail and consumer spending. So depending on what you're doing, if you're looking at setting up a new catering business, or you're looking at selling clothing, or if you're looking at selling gift wares, who knows what you're up to. But looking at Mintel reports is a helpful way of looking at market trends for purchasing power. And everybody needs to be aware, if they're not aware, of the GMCA, Greater Manchester Combined Authority. As much as you have your individual boroughs and councils, and they've all got policy reports and strategy documents and neighbourhood plans coming out of their ears, that you've got all sorts of data in that relate to what you're doing. The GMCA has this strategic framework called Our People, Our Place, and it covers everything from education to well-being to the environment to housing. And there's all sorts of goals in there and priorities, and all sorts of evidence and data that will be really helpful to back up what you're trying to say, and has got the language to describe it in a way that funders want to hear. There's also little niche think tanks as well sometimes. So we've got, Social Enterprise UK. If you're trying to talk about social enterprise or the charity sectors, the Charities Commission, there's reports showing you an NCVO. These kinds of organisations have policy documents explaining the context of the sector. So if you're trying to explain, it's important that you invest in us as a charity because, or us as a social enterprise because, there's the stats there. IPPR is like a public policy and research think tank that's done a lot of work in Manchester, and they've got some good policy documents relating to all sorts. And CLES, the Centre for Local Economic Strategy. I'm throwing you lots of names here, and happy to talk one-to-one with people, and happy to do a follow-up. Basically, the events coming up in March and April are all about partnership working and collaborative thinking, and running troubleshooting sessions and hackathon on people's needs on kind of how come working together to solve problems or working on specific things. And so, for example, if you need, like Jean could bring in her questionnaires, and we can just nail sorting out her data there and then. Or some of you might have a funding bid that you want to strengthen, and we could nail it there and then. Or some of you might be working on your branding and your marketing, we can nail it there and then. Although I'm whizzing through this today, this is just giving you a flavour of good quality research that's out there that you could be using to strengthen what you're up to. So I wonder if anybody's got any questions, or if this has jogged anybody's mind to think, oh well, I have looked at this, or I'm going to start using that, or maybe this is brand new to a lot of people. Curious to know. Anybody got any thoughts? before we wrap up on this little bit, I'm going to just stop sharing my screen. Or if I just fried everybody's brains, that's often what can happen. But if you don't know about this stuff, you can't use it. You know what I mean? And if you're at the early stages of developing your organisation and you become aware that this exists and you can use it, the quicker you're going to bag that 10, 15 or 20k. There you go. Asma didn't know this. Well, you do now, Chuck. You know, it's key, it's vital. Most people have no idea. They're busy writing happy stories about what they'd like to do, and the funders couldn't give a monkeys. You know, they want hard facts and evidence, and they want data. And if you won't give it them, your competitors will. You know, so not to freak you out there, and it's all there. It's there for the taking. Go on, Tina.
Just something else that I put in the first year social impact report was the survey that myself and Abba did on LGBT plus people's experiences during COVID. So it wasn't huge, but when the sector found out we were doing it, they were like, wow, we'd really like this to put in, and now it's in the JSNA. And
you know, this is it. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's in the Stockport, it's in the One Stockport local plan, and you know, so they know that they can come to us to kind of, not that it ever comes with any money or anything, but you know.
Well, you need to hammer them for that, and that's it. You make another good point there, that we all and this is another thing we want to talk about in these collaborative events that we're having in March and April, is how do we influence better? It's all well and good trying to find this data and trying to use it, but actually we've got such intelligence in our networks, in our lived experience, and all sorts of other things that you know, we can strengthen what's out there. And often they're crying out to it. You know, it's Flourish in the last year. You know, we did that GMCA thing where we got paid to do a whole consultation looking at recommissioning of women's centres. You know, just currently we're getting paid to do some not, you know, it's a small amount to be fair, but it could be better, but to do a consultation to make sure that lots of people feed into how social enterprise support can be delivered in future. And that's why I keep putting in the chat this poll. We've done a poll, we've had 101 people in focus groups. You know, it takes some effort, it takes some planning. You need to know what you're doing to do this stuff, but there's people that will pay you to do it. And I remember seeing your research, Tina, that you did through COVID with your community, and it was really well put together. It was simple, and you know, you could tell it was the first kind of time that you'd sort of done that, but it was the first time it had properly been done in Stockport. Do you know what I mean? And that's really, you know, innovative, and what you guys can do that we can show you how to do as well to earn additional income from, that you perhaps hadn't thought of from your research capabilities, or your how to offer voice, you know, from your communities into policy is, you know, is really key. I'll take one more bit from Tina, and then we're going to invite our panel in because they're all waiting in the wings. Fire away.
Just quickly, I think like if an organisation came to me and said, we'll commission you to do this, I'd run a mile, because I'd be so scared of like all their kind of, you know, all their rules and like, oh God, am I going to get there? There's loads of things that I could probably do, like, you know, or
do it together. Do you know what I mean? Whether it's with Sector 3, whether it's people like Flourish, whether we can put you in touch with other people who've done a lot of this stuff before to both navigate any complexity or check, you know. The other thing is, if you're going to enter into research and influencing, you have to be really careful and not compromise your community, and not lose trust, and reputationally some pieces of consultation work and you know, are not worth touching with a barge pole. You know, you have to make that judgment call. But on that note, I'm going to press pause or rather stop with our recording, and